Hey guys, my name is Naomi and welcome to my channel where I talk about all things interior design and home improvement. And if you read the title of this video, you know what we're doing today. We are building a console table. I'm just at Home Depot right now and I grabbed all the lumber. So I ordered a bunch of pine boards online since Ontario is in lockdown again. I had to do the whole curbside pickup thing. So anyway, I'm gonna head to my parents' house since I'm using their garage to put this thing together. And yeah, let's get started. Okay, so I am here in my parents' garage now. I changed into my beater clothes. This sweatshirt, stole it from my brother and then stained it with a bunch of wood stains. So now it's the designated woodworking sweatshirt. So I'll put a list of all of the materials that I'm gonna be using in this video, all of the materials and the tools. So it's gonna be 4 feet long and 11 inches deep, and standard console table height is 30 inches tall. So the first thing I do is mark the center of each of these boards. I use a square to mark a straight and perpendicular line for where the cuts need to be. So the longest board is gonna be the tabletop and the 2 shorter boards will be the 2 legs. So here I'm making the 3 cuts with my miter saw. Keep in mind that these initial cuts that I'm making won't be the final length of the tabletop and the legs. Once the tabletop and legs have been edge glued together, I'll cut them to length with a circular saw, and that way all of the edges will be super smooth and flush together. So the longest board is 8 feet, so that's gonna result in a 4-foot glue up, and the 2 shorter boards are 6 feet, so that's gonna result in 2 3-foot glue ups. Now I'm ready to start gluing and clamping everything together. So I have my clamp set up. I only have a total of 5 parallel clamps, and then 1 of these clamps. I don't know what it's called, but it's not as strong as the parallel clamps. So I'm gonna have to split up gluing up everything together over the span of 2 days because it takes 24 hours for the glue to dry. I decided not to use dowels or any other sort of alignment tool on this project because the boards are already pretty straight, but you can use dowels or biscuits at this point if you want to. Here, I'm orienting the boards in a way that I want. I like when there's a balanced amount of knots and imperfections visible. I'm switching out some of the boards until I get the look that I want. Remember to also check the end grains of your boards and do grain up, grain down. Now that I'm happy with the orientation, I'm ready to glue everything together. I'm using Titebond 3. I use this stuff for building the dining table as well, and it's pretty great. No complaints. So I apply the glue to one of the boards and just spread that out with my finger. And now I'm ready to tighten the clamps. I like to use some scrap wood between the clamps and the wood, especially when clamping soft woods like pine, since the clamps are very strong and can dent the wood. So I just tighten all of the clamps as much as possible. There's gonna be some glue that leaks out of the joins, but that's okay, we can clean that up later. Then I do the exact same thing for the tabletop. So everything is all clamped together. This is one of the legs, and this one is the tabletop. And those 2 pieces right there are the remaining pieces of wood for the other leg that I'm gonna clamp and glue up tomorrow. So I'm gonna wait about half an hour and then scrape off all of this excess glue that is kind of seeping out of this seam. This part is optional. You don't have to scrape it off at this point. You can just do it when it's dry. It's just gonna take a little bit more effort at that point. So now we have to wait about 24 hours for the glue to dry, so I'll be back here tomorrow to take these out of the clamps. Hey guys, so it is the next day. I took these 2 glue ups out of the clamps. This on the right is the tabletop, and then on the left it's I decided I'm gonna make this one the left leg, and then I just glued up and clamped the right leg. So we're gonna have to wait another 24 hours, so I will be back here tomorrow. Hello everybody, so it is the next day again, and I took everything out of the clamps, so all the glue ups are done. We have the 2 legs and the tabletop. Everything's ready to get cut to length and sanded down. So first I need to mark where I'll be making all of the circular saw cuts. This one here is the tabletop, which is already 4 feet long, and I want to keep as much length as possible. So I'm marking a straight line with my square really close to both ends. So now I'm gonna mark one of the legs. Since I want the table to be 30 inches tall and the thickness of the tabletop is 1.5 inches, I need the legs to be 28.5 inches long. So I mark 29 inches from the end for one of the cuts, and then I mark a ½ inch for the other cut. And this is gonna result in a board that's 28.5 inches long. And then I just use my square to mark a straight line all the way through. And then I do the exact same thing to the other leg. So now that all the boards are marked, I'm ready to cut everything to length. I use some C-clamps to secure the board to my workbench, but here I clamped the board without leaving enough overhang, so I had to re-clamp it again with much more overhang. Basically, you need to leave enough room to fit the circular saw guide. Remember to mark how far the saw blade sits from the edge of the base plate. This is gonna tell you where to secure the saw guide. So here I am clamping my circular saw guide to the board with these small clamps that it came with. Then I just press the base plate up against the guide and I just make the cut. And I do the exact same thing to the other side and all of the other boards. Now I'm ready to sand all of the boards. I'm using my Rotary Sander and I always start with 80 grip sandpaper. I usually sand quite a bit with the 80 grip. You want to make sure that you sand off all of the wood glue that may be sitting on the surface and that has kind of soaked into the wood a little bit. You won't really be able to see much glue at this point, but if there is any residual glue left on the surface, that area won't soak any stain and it's just gonna result in a really blotchy and uneven look when you eventually stain the table. I had this issue in a previous project and it was really annoying to fix, so that's why I'm a little bit paranoid and I always overdo it with the 80 grip to make sure all of the glue is gone. So here's one of the legs where I didn't scrape the excess glue off the day before, so I'm using a chisel to scrape it off now, and it's just a little bit more stubborn. And I just continue to sand and I go through quite a few sheets of that 80 grip sandpaper. So now I'm taking a little break from sanding and I'm spray painting all the hardware with black spray paint. I'm expecting that at some angles you may be able to get a glimpse of the hardware, and I think black looks much better than chrome. So here I'm continuing sanding with 220 grip sandpaper now. Remember to get all the edges as well. Once I'm done with the bulk of the sanding, I vacuum the boards to get rid of all that sawdust. So now it's time to assemble the table. Here I have my husband helping me hold the table in place while I decide on the placement of the legs and how much overhang I think looks best. So now I mark where I want one of the legs to be and I measure how far that is from the edge so I can mark the same distance for the other leg. Then I take my L-strap and mark where I need to drill the pilot holes. Remember to use your square to make sure the leg is perpendicular to the tabletop before marking the holes. Then I'm doing the same thing for the corner brackets and marking through the holes on the brackets. When I drill pilot holes, I use this trick where you wrap tape around the drill bit so you know how deep to drill. I'm using 1 1/4 inch screws, so that's how deep I need to make all of the pilot holes. Once the pilot holes are all drilled, I take the screws and just start screwing everything together. Okay, so here's the table all assembled. It's looking pretty nice. I'm pretty happy with it. So what I'm gonna do now is fill some of these holes, like this piece right here where it's kind of chipped. So I'm gonna fill these things right here with some wood filler, and I'm gonna make my own wood filler, so I'll show you guys how I do that. The way I make my wood filler is by first collecting some fine sawdust. I'm using 220 grip sandpaper on my Rotary Sander to sand this piece of scrap pine. Then I just collect the sawdust into a bowl. I transfer a smaller amount into a paper plate since I'm probably not going to use all of the sawdust that I just collected. Then I take my 2-part epoxy resin. As you can see, I'm using the one by Gorilla, and I just pour some of that out and mix it with the sawdust. Remember to use some sort of disposable item when mixing the epoxy. I'm using one of those wooden chopsticks that you get with takeout food. Then I just take a wooden toothpick to pick up the epoxy and sawdust mixture and just apply that to all of the gaps or holes that I want to fill. In previous projects, I have used wood glue instead of epoxy to make wood filler, but I definitely prefer epoxy. I find wood glue, especially Titebond 3, dries kind of white and doesn't soak in stain that well, whereas resin or epoxy dries to only show the color of whatever you mixed into it. I also found that resin soaks in wood stain much better than Titebond 3. So while I wait for the epoxy to dry, I'm going to test out some of the wood stain colors to see which color I want to go with for this project. I take this piece of scrap pine, which I already sanded with the 80 grip and 220 grip, and I start off with applying a pre-stain with a paper towel. So I got a few different oil-based stain colors, and I tried out a bunch of different combinations of these. I'm using paper towels as usual, and I just follow the instructions on the can when applying the stain as well. So here I'm layering different stains on top of each other. But I am super picky when it comes to the color, so I took all of these pieces of stained wood to my house to see what it would look like in that lighting. I ended up using all varathane oil-based stains, and the color combo that I finally decided on was 1 layer of white linen, then 1 layer of early American, and then 1 layer of provincial. So now that the epoxy is all dry, I'm gonna sand all of the spots that I applied that homemade wood filler. I do 80 grip, then go over it with 220 grip. Now I'm gonna lightly round out all of the edges to take the sharpness away. I don't have a router, but I find that using a 220 grip sanding block with a light hand works just fine. So now that all of the sanding is completely done, I'm vacuuming all the surfaces of the table. Then I'm using a microfiber cloth to collect any remaining sawdust that might be on the surface. You can also use a tack cloth here, but I prefer microfiber because it's actually amazing at picking up sawdust, and you don't have to deal with the residue that a tack cloth leaves behind. So there's the table all assembled and ready to get stained. I start off with pre-stain. I work in sections since you shouldn't let the pre-stain sit for too long before wiping off the excess. And like I mentioned earlier, I go in with 1 layer of white linen by Varathane and wipe off the excess. Then I go in with 1 layer of early American, again, wipe off the excess. And finally, I go in with 1 layer of provincial. And I usually let the stain dry for at least 3 hours before applying the next layer. The very last thing I did was paint the corner bracket that was closer to the front. I noticed that you can get a glimpse of that bracket from some angles, so I decided to paint it with some acrylic paint to match the color of the table. So there we have it, we're finally done. I decided not to apply a finish to this table. I might do it later, might not. I don't really want to apply a polyurethane because I don't like the plasticky look that it gives. So if you guys have any suggestions for matte wood finishes that look more natural, let me know in the comments. Hey you guys, so the console table is finally done. It's right behind me right here. We put it in our dining room right next to our dining table, and I'm super happy with how it turned out. I was a little bit nervous about the color since I wanted to go super light with it, and the dining table is a much darker color, so I was a little nervous that it was gonna not blend together very well, but I'm really liking how it's looking, especially in this lighting. I actually made the clay statue and pedestal bowl that you see on the table. I'll have a tutorial up on how I made these pieces on my TikTok and Instagram reels. I also made this texture painting that's hanging above the table, so I'll have a tutorial up on TikTok and reels for this one as well. All of my socials are at Naomi Ramen, or you can find them linked down in the description. And lastly, I want to show you guys some of my previous woodworking projects as well. My very first project was this oak coffee table in our living room. My second project was our dining table, which is also made of oak with these metal legs that I bought from Etsy. And my most recent project before this one was this pine console table. I didn't film any of these since I was brand new to woodworking, and I basically still am, so I'm still trying to get the hang of things. But let me know down in the comments if you guys enjoy tutorial videos like this one and you want to see more, or let me know which topics you want me to cover if you enjoy the more sit down chatty videos. I really hope you guys enjoyed this one, and I hope to see you back here again. Bye guys.